in 2016 with a passion of bringing themed pop culture trivia to our fellow Austinites. And since there, we've grown and added Muzingo, which is our music bingo game, to our roster. We also do a lot of general knowledge style quizzes and fully personalized quizzes in private event spaces.
That's awesome. Honestly, I asked everybody this at the beginning of the call, and I kind of want to ask you, I definitely want to hear about the origin of like Get It Gals and like where this love for trivia came from, but you have to indulge me by telling me, what is your favorite round of trivia you've ever played?
Okay, my favorite round of trivia is one that fell completely flat with the crowd. Co-founder of Get It Gals, Kati, has always been really into emo music. Early 2000s emo is her forte. So we were hosting an I Love the 2000s trivia very early on, in maybe year one of being a company. And she demanded that we have a round of trivia called So Emo, where we would read really emo lyrics, and for 1 point you could name the song, and for an additional point you could name the emo artist. And she was so into it the entire round. She didn't even notice that it was just crickets from the crowd. I think the highest score we got on that round, which you could get up to 20 points, was 3 points.
Oh, no.
So it was a fantastic learning experience, is one reason it's my favorite, because we learned, okay, maybe something that we were obsessed with in the early 2000s isn't the kind of thing that we want to bring to the masses. But it was also just a great representation of how we can bring our own backgrounds and just pure joy to what we're doing night after night.
I love that. Tell me a little bit about the gals. You're here with us, but you've talked a little bit about Kati. Where did she come into the picture?
So Kati and I met back when we were waitressing at Cain and Abel's. We were both going to school at UT Austin, and we were working at this college bar where, really, if I'm being honest, all my closest gal pals worked there at one point or another. And we've just kind of built this epic circle of people through working at this terrible, terrible bar. And Kati was one of those people. We've stayed really close through the years. So much so that we started getting really excited at various momentous occasions for that friend group. Things like bachelorette parties, baby showers, things in that vein of putting on little trivia games to entertain the crowd and have a game-based activity at each of these parties. We really gravitated toward each other. We really gravitated toward just having a great time in the planning and the execution of doing these things. And then finally, it all culminated at a poolside wedding reception. We hosted a trivia where we didn't know a ton of the groom's side of the crowd, but most of them worked in the Austrian restaurant and bar industry. So when we hopped down from the little patio where we were hosting, a bunch of them approached us and said, this is something we would love for you to do where I work. And you should really consider taking this outside of just this friend group and mounting it for the public. So from there, we tested it out at actually the groom's bar that he was managing. And then it grew from there. We started doing one event a month in the very beginning. And then pre-COVID, in February, we had grown to 27 events in that 29-day month.
Wow, that is incredible. I mean, you make it sound so easy, like this sort of transition that you've had, but these guys coming up to you at this wedding reception, encouraging you to take this and make money off of it, you know, there had to be some feelings there about, you know, jumping into this and creating it. Like, walk me a little bit through, you know, what happened between the moment that idea came to you and those people were encouraging you to do that, and the moment when you were like, yeah, you know, this is a legitimate business, I'm going to chase it.
Well, what's really funny is that you talk about the money aspect, like that popped into our head the day that we got all the compliments. In reality, we were like, oh, this should be a hobby that we share with anyone who will listen to us make jokes on a microphone about any given theme that we can quiz over. It wasn't until about 4 months into testing out different themed trivias at the groom's bar that he managed that he actually approached us and said, hey, I really want y'all to do this on a weekly basis for us. that was something we couldn't even wrap our minds around. We both had, or I had a full-time job. Katie had gone back to school for UX design, and we were both working multiple side hustles to make ends meet. So we just couldn't even wrap our minds around adding another thing to our weekly plate with all of the things going on in existence at that time. And then he was the one who said, well, we're going to pay you. And so that was the moment that Katie and I just had this realization of like, oh, this is more than just a hobby. This is something we really could grow. And just because it brings us a lot of joy and we love doing it, and we're texting back and forth all day about our coinciding costumes we're going to wear to any given trivia night, it's still like something that is worth getting paid for maybe. And so from there, we started accepting payment rather than just an unlimited bar tab. And then just grew and grew, added more partner bars, added lots of private events on the side, doing those more on the weekends. And it was just like a really awesome, slow and steady stride that we got into.
That is incredible. So many people talk about this transition that happens when they start to move beyond a hobby and taking it to something that becomes their full-time job. And, you know, all of a sudden their sentiment towards that activity changes. Has that happened for you with trivia or with Katie? And how have you guys managed that?
Yeah, so I was working full-time, as I mentioned, and Katie was going to school. Yeah. She was done with school and was on the job hunt, and she was full throttle building Get It Gals. I was just playing catch up, helping write questions and co-hosting with her and having a blast while doing it, but I just didn't really have as much time to commit to the company.
Yeah.
Then Katie got offered a full-time job as a UX designer, and all of a sudden we had to really kind of completely switch roles, to where all of a sudden I was going full steam ahead trying to grow this business and kind of balancing that back and forth with a full-time job. And she was having to take a big step back, which definitely had its growing pains, but we just decided we're going to have monthly meetings and keep it an ongoing conversation of how we're going to share the responsibility in an effort to do whatever's best for this little growing company.
So having a co-founder, especially like you guys are kind of like trading life situations, really helped you guys balance the rigor that comes with getting a business off the ground.
Yeah, she's definitely the more type A and I'm the more type B. So like I said, lots of growing pains, lots of me realizing, oh, I have to double check that. She's not the one sending out all the copy. I've got to be the one doing that. But it's lent itself to where I have a whole new skill set now that I never would have cultivated had that not happened.
That's awesome. Tell me about that skill set. Like what's something you learned about becoming an entrepreneur, really hosting that business?
You know, I think it's just all the little things that nobody thinks about when they're starting a business. Balancing all the expenses and doing taxes and realizing, oh no, this is going to take a full workday at minimum. Mm-hmm. Queuing up social posts, doing one thing that took me forever was figuring out how to use the Sketch program so that I could put all of our image work out there to like tell people about the events that were coming up. But Katie was right there with me. We would have these monthly meetings. We'd order pizza or we'd meet at a brewery and drink beer while she taught me all of her skills. And then I would tell her to drink another beer and calm down because she has enough on her plate. And it slowly but surely has shifted in a really nice way.
That is awesome. Sketch is one of those things that as an entrepreneur, I really just don't want to tackle at the moment.
I'll teach you.
Awesome. Love that. So I can imagine taking trivia from a fun hobby at your friends' parties to something where you're in front of an audience, you're getting paid, like that adds a different level to the experience that you're providing. Did it change for you, or did you pay more attention to it? Like, tell me about that transition from just like the service that you're providing from, friends' parties all the way to, these bars who are now contracting with you for weekly games.
Yeah, I mean, I think we always put a lot of care into what we were doing, even back when it was for, a baby shower. Mm-hmm. But we really had to start thinking with our audience in mind. Our audience was no longer our core group of friends who thought we were hilarious and could do no wrong. So we really had to start thinking about the folks who were coming back again and again and communicating with them, what themes do you want to see? What are things that we can do better to keep you engaged? So that was definitely the biggest change, was thinking with our audience in mind. And our audience has definitely changed over time. When we first got started, we had a lot of like 40s were coming, like 40s, early 50s were coming a lot to our events. And then all of a sudden, when we started hosting trivias at more trendy bars, we realized we were getting a lot more into that 20s, early 30s young professional scene. And they wanted different themes. They weren't as excited about ye old British trivia. They were a lot more excited for things like The Office trivia.
Awesome. How did you, because I think defining your audience as a business owner, it can come, you can either be super proactive about it, or I think, and sometimes it sort of slaps you across the face, like, oh my gosh, my audience has changed and I really need to make a pivot. What was that like for you all? When did you realize that your audience was starting to shift?
I think it was definitely when we had more than 2 or 3 partner bars, when we were starting to really up our roster and seeing the folks that were coming not just to the bar because they were a regular there, but they were coming to different venues of ours to interact with our events. And really singling out those people and talking to them before and after trivia and finding out what they were interested in and what themes were going to keep them coming back, and things like themed cocktails or a drink prize for best costume. What were the kinds of things they were going to get excited about and tell their friends about, so that we could expand the kind of audience that's going to follow us from bar to bar.
That's awesome. I want to keep digging in on this like audience experience that you provide, because you mentioned, at the beginning, I asked you what your favorite trivia round was. And you had this really interesting story about how it's actually the worst trivia round from an audience interaction standpoint. And I'm curious, like, how do you to build a positive experience in trivia for people, even when they don't know maybe the content of the round, or they're feeling a little bit unfamiliar? Like, how do you do that?
We try really hard to just cultivate a sense of community and a sense of fun at each one of our events. So the moment we get there, the first thing we do is we plug into the sound system and we start with a pre-trivia playlist that, based on the demographics who have previously enjoyed this particular theme, songs from that year or songs from an artist that are going to get them really excited and moving and dancing and just being a little bit more open and willing to talk to the tables around them and willing to come up when they register with us and chat for a little bit. Obviously, since we do themed trivia, what's really great about that is that the people who are coming 9 times out of 10 are super fans on whatever that subject is. And then 1 time out of 10, it's somebody who's on like a 3rd date and is still trying to be really nice to their new boo. But it's great because everyone who is in that space connects over at least one thing. So every time we're on a microphone and we quote something from the show, every time that somebody walks in and they're wearing a shirt that's inspired by that movie, everyone immediately gets it. And it's like the entire time we're at these events, we're all part of this massive inside joke. And it really does cultivate this sense of like, wow, we're all competing against each other, but we're all here over this same shared interest, this same fandom.
I love that. You're like creating a sense of community around the pop culture that people love to spend their time with.
Thank you for saying that. That's the goal.
It sounds like you're already achieving it. And you talked through this, your favorite round of trivia was actually the one where Kati was super into it, but the audience was really not connecting. Can you give me an example of a time when you felt like the community aspect and like the vibe with that trivia round was just so strong that you elevated it to another level?
I think anytime we do a quotes round, that there's this really amazing thing that happens where the idea is we'll read a quote and you have to name the character who said it from the show or the movie. And what will happen is that we'll say the quote and then we'll notice people will continue with the script from the movie or the TV show. And that's when you feel like everyone is just so completely engaged and enthralled and that we're all on the same wavelength, where we could probably keep that going for like a full minute of quoting the scene or from the movie or the TV show, but okay, we'll move on to number 2 instead.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had any of those like ad hoc moments just like really take over and steal the show?
I think so. I think especially for the Office trivia, any fans of The Office know that you can sneak a "that's what she said" into almost anything, but when you have a crowd of almost 200 people, anything you say that has any slight innuendo whatsoever, it is completely taken over by the crowd screaming "that's what she said." But like I said, when those moments happen and we go a little off track because everyone is so dialed into the same thing, it makes me feel like we're achieving that goal of creating a sense of community.
That's awesome. I kind of want to dig into a piece of your personal life really quickly, because your full-time job is essentially getting to spend a lot of time with music and TV and movies. Do you ever get tired of that? And what do you spend your free time doing?
I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world because I get to spend half of my time talking into a microphone about all the things I love, and people listen and they care. And then the other half of the time I'm preparing by binging Netflix. So I feel really lucky. I feel like when I have time away from that, I try to always have a show that I'm watching that I'm not watching for trivia, that's just for me. I'm always trying to have a book that I'm reading, like a chapter of a day, that's just for me. And I hang by the pool all the time.
I love that. What is your TV show or book right now that you're reading just for you?
So I just started a book called Normal People. That group of gal pals that I told you about earlier that we all worked together back in college, they're all reading it together right now. So that's always really fun to have still a way to connect with people over media in some way, but I don't have to do it for a job. And then as for a TV show, I never watched Boardwalk Empire until very recently, and I've been real into it.
That's awesome. Have you gotten to a space where you really like burned out over Netflix binging or spending time with a particular show? I imagine you've done several Office rounds.
I have never gotten sick of like the sitcom type of themes that we get to do, because they're almost, they're comedic, they're funny. You can always find little gems that you didn't notice before. I will say I can never watch The Walking Dead ever again. I watched every single episode. I had to hear all those terrible bone crunching noises. I hated every second of it, but people were begging for it.
Mm-hmm.
The night came of the event and no one showed up.
No.
So I'm done with Walking Dead. Never again. No more. Don't ask. And that's the only one that I've gotten so sick of that I just, and I think it was amplified by the fact that we had to end up canceling the event. So all those hours felt just wasted.
Oh my gosh. That is a lot of work and a lot of bone crunching sounds to put into something that shows up. Can't confirm. So you mentioned this cancellation of this event, and what that brought up for me is, the reality of your business right now with COVID. I imagine you're not doing these events in bars right now. Tell me a little bit about what that experience was like for you at the beginning of the year as a business owner that relies on event-based income.
Yeah, well, we started off the year and we were projected to just crush every goal that we've ever had, because we started doing 2 events per night on opposite sides of town. So that's how we were able to reach that 27 events in 29 days in February and just smash every goal. It was incredible. And then all this happened. So obviously having live events, both public or private right now, is something that just isn't safe, especially in Austin right now, where the numbers are just going up and up and up. So that was a really, really tough realization. We have had times in the past, like that Walking Dead event, where we had to cancel, and that was a bummer, and I was down and ate a whole pizza and felt better. This was something where it was completely out of our control. It's not, well, we should have chosen a different theme. Well, we should have chosen a different night of the week. This was something that just made us feel really powerless. So I definitely had a few days of pouting and struggling and just wondering if this was the end of this journey. I really don't want it to end anytime soon. But then I have an incredible friend who called me up and had this really great idea about how to do a virtual event together, specifically a virtual fundraiser in efforts to raise money for those in our community most affected by COVID-19. So we did a music bingo night. She is an event and marketing extraordinaire. Her name's Kelsey Hangay. And she told me on that call, I just kept saying no to every idea. That's not going to work. This isn't going to work. And they were all really small problems that I kept saying no to. And she told me that if I wanted to make this work, I was going to have to get scrappy. And so I've really tried to carry that through all of these COVID times, that the first time we mounted a good handful of virtual events, they were clunky and scrappy and not anywhere near the quality of what we had built up in our reputation, at least in my mind. But we were able to start before a lot of other companies started putting virtual events on. We were able to use our event expertise, especially combined with Kelsey's help, as well as two other gals who are helping through the whole thing, Kate and Erica, to do good, to actually fundraise for this thing that's really hurting our community. And so I don't even remember the original question that you asked me, but that's how I feel about COVID right now.
And you've described several of the pivots that you've made, but I also heard in there a twinge of like how you were treating yourself as an entrepreneur in that time. And yeah, I'm just curious, like, how have you practiced like kindness and grace, knowing that, yeah, you had to make a major pivot. And yeah, right up front, your events weren't on par with what you thought that they should have been compared to what your live events were. Like, you know, how are you managing that as a person?
Well, early on into everything shutting down and quarantine, I don't know if you know, but Peloton made all of their content free. And so I got the app and I finally started doing daily meditations, particularly meditations around grace and forgiveness and self-love. And so anytime that I'm noticing myself huffing and puffing, getting frustrated, really just hearing a lot of negative self-talk, then I know that it's time for me to take that 10-minute break and just sit, meditate, you know, and just walk away from it knowing that I'm doing the best that I can. We're all doing the best that we can in these times. And we can keep growing and evolving and trying to do better, but there's also a real need for some extra self-love and forgiveness through all that. And if that doesn't work, I take an anger nap.
How long are anger naps? You got to give me the playbook for this one.
It just depends how mad you are, gal. You don't set an alarm, you just let it happen.
I love that. What a great strategy. Something that I've been using for myself to practice grace and kindness in this time is actually celebrating wins. And I force myself to write down one thing that went well for the business every week. And I'm curious to hear from you. What is a win you feel like Get It Gals has accomplished in this time of COVID?
I love that idea, Sarah. I'm going to steal that.
Steal it.
Yeah. I would say, so I told you a little bit about this Muzingo fundraiser that we started. We started doing it every week, and then we noticed that a lot less people were tuning in every single week because obviously the virtual events market is getting a little more saturated. So we switched it. Now we're doing these mega monthly blowouts. They're like an hour and a half. They're so much fun. Each one is raising funds for a different nonprofit that's helping Austinites through COVID. And the last one that we did last Monday, we surpassed this incredible goal. We raised over $5,000 for local charity organizations. So that was a huge moment of like, this is what happens when you team up with your incredible friends, when you get scrappy, and when you use your talents to put good back out into your community.
That's so special. And I remember seeing that on Instagram, that you all surpassed that goal of yours. And it's another great example of you all building community, but in this way, it's really giving back to, you know, every community is hurting right now, but there's no better community to give back to than the one you live in. So
Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure. Well, it feels like you're making a bigger impact when you're working within your own community. But what's been really great through this whole process of not only Musingo, but also our virtual trivia games
Mhm.
is that something totally unexpected too is that all of a sudden we went from having maybe 95% of the folks tuning in being folks from Austin to now we're seeing folks from multiple states. We did a Schitt's Creek trivia and somebody set an alarm for 6 a.m. to tune in and play all the way from India. So it's been this really great way of this really great realization that community doesn't have to be a place. With virtual events, community can be a lot of different people tuning in and interacting with one thing week after week.
I love that so much. Um, Earlier you talked about the start of this year, you and Get It Gals really smashing your goals that you'd set out to achieve kind of like right at the start. And I'm curious, has anything about COVID changed the goals or the direction of your business and what you're going to be chasing moving forward?
Yeah, it really goes hand in hand with what I was just talking about, that when we first started offering virtual events, we thought, okay, this is how we'll keep engaging with our local audience so that they don't forget about us. And then once we are back in bars and restaurants, that they'll come back. But then it was like people were saying to their friends and coworkers and family members from out of town, hey, I go to these trivias and now they're doing virtual. You should play with me. And then they tell somebody and they tell somebody. And now it's that we've started building relationships and connections with people all over because they tune in week to week.
Mhm.
And we've really started wrapping our minds around the idea of what would an expansion outside of Austin look like? Because before we could only envision our followers that we saw at each one of our events here in Austin. Now we're seeing there are people all over who are enjoying what we're putting out there. So let's make a plan to try to get to their city.
That sounds pretty epic and also a pretty cool perspective shift that COVID has helped initiate. Do you think you've learned anything as an entrepreneur, or any new approaches as an entrepreneur that you're going to carry with you, just moving beyond this pandemic? And
Well,
there's
one thing that we've gotten a lot of feedback on is there are a ton of folks who say, I love your trivia, but because I have a baby right now, I can't go out and go every month. Because if they love Friends trivia, then it's like every month we try to do one of those, but you never know what day of the month or which weekday. So they look at it like, if you keep doing virtual events, I can tune in no matter what. So we've had a lot of really great suggestions about ways that we can continue offering virtual events, uh, even when we're back to doing live events full force. So I feel like that's something we're still exploring, but I do think the events world is going to change in a massive way after all this, where people are going to be a lot more open to having virtual events. For example, we did a birthday party with a gal who lives in Texas now, but she moved from Michigan. So she had her whole Michigan family tune in and they got to have a birthday party. We did a music bingo and a little bit of trivia for her birthday party. And she talked about how this is something that she plans on doing year after year, even when COVID is something that hopefully is in a distant memory.
That sounds so fun. I love that. Are you like excited about it? Like you lit up when you started talking about this kind of like next sort of chapter, which it makes me so happy to see.
Well, one thing that's happened through this also is that Katie has been able to really re-engage. She has a perfect little 1-year-old and she has a whole team working under her as a lead UX designer now. So she doesn't have the time that she used to have to co-host events alongside me.
Mm-hmm.
But now that it's just a 1-hour commitment every Tuesday night, she co-hosts with me again. And I feel a lot more connected to her. And when she has advice on future business decisions, I feel like she's so much more tuned into the business now that she's hosting again once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we would not have been able to do at live events because it's not an hour from the comfort of your office. It's 3.5 hours at a bar. So I feel like this is a way that Kati and I can stay really connected and engaged in hosting events together. And it's a really cool way that we can reach folks all over who want to celebrate with friends both near and far for any occasion.
Yeah, it sounds like COVID has, for all of the challenges it's brought everybody, it's also brought some really great things to you and the gals, really, which is awesome. Now that we've, you're talking about Kati kind of like really coming back into the business and being part of these events with you, I'm curious, way back when this was first getting started and you and Kati were collaborating to get it off the ground, did you all have any moments that made you feel like you wanted to abandon ship?
There was the first partner bar, the one that I told you all about earlier, the one that really took a chance on us because it was managed by the groom at that poolside wedding that we did a trivia game for. They were incredible to us. They obviously took a risk on a brand new company. They let us be so creative in choosing some of the weirdest themes. Like I made Kati do a UFO trivia once, like 4 people came. And so they were really important to us. And we felt like we had built such a strong partnership. And then out of nowhere, nobody expected it, they closed. They locked out by the city, a sign on the door, and we never ever heard from them again. So in that moment, I felt like this trivia journey was so beautiful and incredible, but there was just no way of recovering from losing our partner. We were there once a week. We had one other partner bar where we did a monthly quiz, and we were maybe doing 1 or 2 private events a month back at that time. And it really felt like it was over. Kati was a lot more optimistic than I was. She tends to be the more optimistic one when it comes to things like this. But I really started having to figure out, what is my life going to look like? Oh no, I'm going to have to go back to catering. I hated catering.
Oh no.
And then 3 hours later, that other partner bar where we were having just one event a month emailed and said, we're really sorry to hear about what happened today to kind of your home base, but we'd love to be your new home base if you want to switch and have weekly events with us now. So it was like 3 hours of misery and me thinking it was time to quit. And then that it turned into like a happy accident, because when people saw that we weren't just focused on this one spot, that we were willing to expand to multiple bars, we started getting so many partnerships that would have never happened. Obviously, I hate that that bar had to close down, but had it not closed, had we not been put in that position where it felt really dire, then we would have never been able to have the expansion and growth that led us to where we were, not today, but a few months ago.
So many stars aligning to point you to the fact that Get It Gals is something worth pursuing, which is awesome. Can you describe a moment when you, kind of opposite of my last question, what's an experience that made you go, oh my goodness, maybe I should abandon ship on this? I'm interested in knowing, what's an experience you've had as an entrepreneur building Get It Gals that really made you want to dive deeper and go all in and, put a blocker up. Like, I'm not going to think about another job ever because it's Get It Gals or whatever I decide next, but I'm not going back to that other thing.
That's such a great question. I think I have to say we were brought on to do an I Love the 80s trivia for a South by Southwest event where they were, it was a South by Southwest film collaboration for the movie Ready Player One. Do you remember that movie?
Yes.
It was, the writer was from Austin. It was coming out. Steven Spielberg directed it. There were a lot of 80s throwbacks in the movie and in the book. Mm-hmm. And so we got to come in and do this epic I Love the 80s quiz. And it just felt like we made it. We got to bring in 3 friends to help us along the way. So we were like an actual team versus it just being me and Kati or me and one other co-host. We got official badges and t-shirts and drink tickets. And it was this moment where standing up on that stage with a full production team behind us and just feeling like, wow, like they chose our business to do this. And then Elon Musk walked in right before we started trivia, and he took a picture in the DeLorean, and then I got up and I read question 1, and then he left. But that's okay, we don't need him. But that was still cool to be like, we're hosting an event where Elon Musk just walked in.
That is so cool. Oh my gosh, I love that. Jess, I have to thank you for spending so much of your evening with us. I feel like I've learned a lot. You've been super inspiring, but I do have one more question for you. And I think it's going to definitely leave us all inspired and wondering how we can support you on this journey. So please call that out if there are ways that the folks on this call or anybody watching the recording after can support you in this. But if you knew absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt that you could not fail, what would your next goal be?
Okay. If I knew that we, the Get It Gals, couldn't fail, my answer is going to be twofold.
Cool.
The first thing would be that we would expand outside of Austin and then outside of Texas and just take that as far as we could. Bring our unique brand of themed trivia to as many cities that will have us. Part of expanding and growing for me and for the Get It Gals team, one thing that maybe it's not if we couldn't fail, but knowing that this is something we can't fail at, is growing with diversity in mind. Thinking really hard about how in everything that we do, we can amplify voices of all kinds. When I turned 21, I fell in love with pub trivia. I thought it was the best thing to happen to my Monday nights, and I did it for 8 years straight. But it was really, really rare that it was a woman up on the microphone. It was almost always a white dude. No shade to the white dudes, but it's true. But when it was a woman up there on that microphone, it really did, it felt different for me. I would look up at this person and I would think, wow, that's so cool that they get to do this. And maybe I could do something like this one day. I'm like a 22-year-old trying to get a teaching job. And we all know why that happens, right? It's because representation matters, and because I could look up on a stage and see someone who looks like me and feel empowered. But there's still a lot of work to be done, even in this little trivia world. I feel like the trivia game, as much as we've done a lot of work in making sure that women have a lot more of a voice, it's very, very rare that minorities have a voice in trivia events. So for us, I think that some of the things we could do as we grow and expand, we could think about our pre-trivia playlists and what artists are we playing. And we can think about the people who are writing trivia questions with us, making sure it's not just me or just one other person, getting multiple perspectives. And finally, and in my opinion, the most important, as we're able to grow, that means we're able to hire many more trivia hosts and just get an incredibly diverse team where we can, like I said, amplify all these voices and really lead with representation in mind, even in our little small world of trivia events.
I have to tell you, I just got goosebumps listening to you. And if I am hearing it correctly, Get It Gals is going to change the face of trivia hosts in this country and the world. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Okay. One theme trivia at a time.
I love it. Jess, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but again, I really want to thank you for spending so much time with us this evening. If you all are interested in connecting with Get It Gals further, obviously we spent our whole evening talking about trivia. They do a bunch of trivia. You can check out Get It Gals at getitgals.com for their downloadable trivia slide decks, or if you want to reach out and get in touch about a customizable private virtual event, those are there too. And y'all are also on social at Get It Gals. And you're hosting a Muzingo tonight, right? No.
Tonight is trivia. Tonight is Brooklyn Nine-Nine trivia. And then if you go to our Facebook page tomorrow, you can vote on next week's themes.
Love it. Awesome. Jess, thank you so much. Really appreciated you joining tonight. Thank you for everyone on the call. I hope you all have a great rest of your Tuesday and that it looks less like Monday from here. Love it.